They're the NCR's finest, a one-man platoon, each of them. You got a job where even thinking about it would scare a man senseless? That's when you bring in the Rangers. And if you see a squad of veterans, guys who are in their black armor, well, you won't find a more beautiful sight.
The Rangers are one of the most visually iconic groups in New Vegas, and one of the most interesting factions in the series in terms of their evolution, as their history dates all the way back to Interplay's 1988 title, Wasteland. In it, you control a squad of Desert Rangers, a group of Arizona Army engineers that survived an apocalyptic war, who eventually destroy a rogue AI hell-bent on exterminating humanity. Fallout 1 was a spiritual successor to Wasteland, and fittingly one of the companions, Tycho, was also a Desert Ranger. When asked about Rangers in the Tell Me About system, Tycho will mention a link to the real-world Texas Rangers. We Rangers hail from back east, what used to be called Nevada. Our heritage stretches back to the days of the Texas Rangers. We learned survival and combat skills in order to go out into the world and have a chance of surviving and making things better. In another line he mentions, "My grandfather was a ranger way back when, and he taught my father everything he knew. Dad passed it on to me, so I know enough not to drink glowing water, so to speak." In another line, he expands on what he learned from his ranger family. "Yeah, well, my father taught me everything there is to know about survival. Don't drink water that's totally clear and free of insects and moss, for instance. Only poisonous or radioactive water would be that clean in the wilderness." When asked about Junktown's casino owner Gizmo, Tycho says he reminds him of his dad's story about a fat freak in Las Vegas, likely a reference to Wasteland's Fat Freddy character, a crime lord who appeared in Vegas. When asked about his weapon proficiency, he mentions he has good ranger training, and that he can of course use a spear, which is both a melee weapon in Fallout and a brawling weapon in Wasteland. While he wears generic combat armor, he describes the outfit of Desert Rangers, stating, "A man in dusty leather armor, with a trench coat and gas mask." It would also feature the Ranger perk, which decreases your chance of hostile random encounters while traveling, likely another homage to the game's Desert Ranger roots. The perk would also appear in the second game in Tactics, lowering your chance of random hostile encounters and increasing your outdoorsman skill. Like many aspects of the first game, the lore details of the Rangers and Tycho's past were left pretty vague, but designer Jesse Heinig revealed more about the character's past. Tycho was a nod to the Desert Rangers of Wasteland. Obviously, that history didn't wind up in Fallout, so that makes it more of an homage than anything. Originally, the idea was that he came from east of California, in the Nevada area. His family comes from people who survived the devastation when war happened, likely living among the Badlands of Nevada. As I envisioned it, Tycho learned a lot about desert survival and whatnot from a small community, which kept a strong survivalist contingent, so they still had small arms and books. They probably had something like the cliff-dwelling Indians going on in their town, though I never fleshed it out. Anyway, Tycho took off to wandering the desert with traders and explorers for several years, returning from time to time with goods or maps. Most likely he started with small trips and went further abroad as he became more experienced. He went as far as the Gulf of Mexico and Texas, and then headed back west. Eventually he wound up on the west coast as a long-range explorer from a loose group of Desert Rangers, whose actual origin, scope, and purpose weren't defined. In some ways, Tycho is reminiscent of Master Yupa from Nausicaa and the Valley of the Winds. He carries a gas mask, just in case, wears hardened leather armor, has a knife, knuckles, canteen, all the usual survival gear. I'd pictured him as this guy in leather armor, Fallout style, with a gas mask hanging around his neck, goggles to keep out the sand and glare, a sand-colored cloak usable for camouflage and to keep the sun off, and a double-barreled shotgun. It's worth noting that many of the items he mentioned, including the knife, brass knuckles, canteen, leather armor, and gas mask, were all also items in Wasteland.
In Shady Sands, Tandy helps her father Aradesh bring a new community and new life out of the broken remains of the world. They are responsible for the new California Republic, whose ideals spread across the land.
After the destruction of the Master and military base, Tandy and Aradesh founded the New California Republic. New Vegas' guide reveals the village of Shady Sands changed its name to NCR in 2186, but this date wasn't actually mentioned in the second game. In 2189, the NCR was voted into existence as a sprawling federation of 5 states: Shady Sands, Los Angeles, Maxon, Hub, and Dayglow. Now the capital of this new nation, the settlement of NCR would outlaw slavery, gambling, and drugs. At an undefined point between the first 2 games, the NCR Rangers were formed, a group initially described as one of the strongest abolitionist forces in the wasteland. The $20 NCR bill in New Vegas states that Seth, the leader of Shady Sands Guards, was the very first Ranger, but again, this had never been mentioned beforehand. In fact, the only time Seth is referenced in the second game is when Tandy mentions this.
My dad and Seth searched for years trying to find Vault 13. They died looking. Always said it was west of here. If somebody were to find Vault 13, that'd do us even better than 15.
He bravely guarded the entrance to Shady Sands and helped the Vault Dweller travel to the Rad Scorpion Cave, so I think this was a fitting alteration to the war. The Rangers operate out of a secret base inside of an old mechanic shop in the settlement of NCR. When referring to the location, the guide even mentions, "Shh, it's a secret." After talking to their leader, Chief Elise, she asks your opinion on slavery. If you say you're against it, she reveals she's part of a covert group dedicated to eliminating slavery. She goes on to reveal they have friends in high places who have banned slavery south of the city. Elise will ask you if you want to join, and if so, she'll give you a quest to free a group of slaves in the bazaar of NCR, where a slaver named Vortis has imprisoned tribals. If you kill Vortis and free them, you'll receive a pen that recognizes you as a New California Ranger. Its description mentions a code wheel, presumably used to locate the Rangers' hideouts. The guide description references the Texas Rangers, potentially another tip of the hat to Tycho and his wasteland heritage. You're not in Texas, but if you wear this pen, you'll be treated like an NCR Ranger. Respected by some, reviled by others, ignored by most. Afterwards, NPCs like Redding Sheriff and other Rangers will recognize your position. You can instead help Vortis by stealing a map of the Rangers' hideouts. It isn't stated in-game, but the guide reveals this map would allow the much larger Slavers Guild to destroy the Rangers. Notably, the Rangers' ranks aren't restricted to humans, as one of their members is a super mutant. Gond is described as no brighter looking than the rest of its kind, and his presence shows the group's tolerance to other races. Otherwise, there really isn't all that much information regarding the faction or how they factor into the NCR's military. But Chris Avallone did expand on the group in the Fallout Bible. The NCR military is comprised of several divisions, one including special cavalry and mechanized units. One of their special forces units consists of the Rangers, a select group that is pledged to protect the people of the Waste, much like the Texas Rangers of old. The Rangers are said to have numerous safe houses throughout the Waste, and they use these to strike at slavers outside of NCR territory, usually in the north. As expected, the two groups hate each other with a passion. Ghouls, super mutants, and humans were all known to serve in the NCR armed forces, even in the Rangers. The manual uses a Desert Ranger and an example to explain how armor functions, but the group isn't mentioned outside of that. Tycho is briefly referenced during the Cafe of Broken Dreams encounter, where Tandy asks if you still talk to him. He's mentioned again in the Bridgekeeper encounter, and the conversation implies he died between the events of the first 2 games. While Rangers had a small role in earlier entries, they were planned to have a much more significant focus in Van Buren. Chris Avallone shared a slide during a presentation showing the Rangers had many clashes against the Legion, a fitting enemy considering they began as an anti-slavery faction. The Rangers were also instrumental in decisively defeating the Legion at Hoover Dam, as they obtained information the Legion was having an orgy at a slavers' camp. NCR forces then surrounded the camp and killed dozens of drunken slavers. It seems that Tycho's description of Rangers partially inspired the outfits of Van Buren's NCR police. Similar to the look and spirit of the Texas Rangers of yesteryear, the Hoover Dam police pride themselves on keeping the peace. They dress in distinctive beige trench coats and black cowboy hats, so they are pretty easy to separate in a crowd. Also, their ability to remain stone-faced through all adversity and pleasures is truly awe-inspiring. In another section, you could buy a posable action figure replica of an NCR Ranger, which came with a variety of weapons. There was also a mission that was very similar to Elise's quest. In the Ouroboros area, a NCR Ranger would have asked you to take out some gate guards and then open the gate, so they could free a group of slaves. Van Buren was cancelled in late 2003, but many of these elements would end up in New Vegas 7 years later. The Rangers were mentioned once again in Josh Sawyer's Tabletop RPG. This wasn't an official project and isn't canon, but there's a lot of overlap between this RPG, Van Buren, and New Vegas. Technically part of the NCR military, the Rangers are practically a force unto themselves. The Rangers are given exceptional leeway and flexibility to deal with both the intrusion of organized crime and the operation of slavers near the borders of NCR territory. NCR Rangers typically have bounties on their head, even in NCR states. In 2006, Interplay contracted Glutton Creeper Games to make a Fallout D20 RPG. I'm not sure what Interplay was thinking because they had already sold the IP rights to Bethesda 2 years earlier. When it was near completion in May of 2007, Bethesda threatened to file a lawsuit. The game was then rebranded as Exodus and all references to Fallout were removed, but it did retain a Desert Ranger class that was a clear homage to Wasteland. The Desert Ranger Force is known across the Waste as being fearsome with tough soldiers and expert survivalists. They serve a variety of purposes, but are primarily a mix of special forces and vigilante lawmen, like the Texas Rangers before the Exodus. They primarily concern themselves with keeping law and order in the smaller towns, and making strategic military strikes against enemies of the people, like the large slaver groups. The Desert Rangers will accept anyone into their ranks as long as that person passes some military and survival test. Acceptance into the Rangers is a great honor in the Wasteland. Mojave Outpost was originally a checkpoint between Nevada and California that was abandoned for over 100 years after the bombs fell. 10 years before the events of New Vegas, it became the site of an important treaty. During a speech at Hoover Dam, President Kimball reveals that Chief Elise met the Desert Rangers to discuss the terms of their unification.
10 years ago, Chief Elise met with representatives of the Desert Rangers to discuss terms of what would become the Rangers Unification Treaty. The treaty was more than a resolution to welcome the Desert Rangers into the Republic. It was a covenant to protect Southern Nevada against Caesar's Legion and the tyranny of his regime.
Despite being such an important element of the Rangers' history, the event is only mentioned a few times. Like when Chief Hanlon, the leader of the Rangers, mentions it when asked why the Rangers are in Nevada.
There's a lot of answers to that question, but it started with the Ranger Unification Treaty. We weren't always the only show in town. Nevada had its own posse, the Desert Rangers. They fought Caesar even farther east out in Arizona. Years back, we met with the Desert Rangers at Mojave Outpost and agreed to help them against Caesar if they would join the NCR.
The second line has a subtitle stating the conflict against the Legion didn't go well for the Desert Rangers, but that part of the line was never recorded, strangely. Cass mentions it while she's in your party as well.
One's a ranger, one's an NCR trooper, supposed to represent unification of West and East, or some such shit. As far as those two iron lovebirds go, they've got more spine you'll see in a year from the NCR government.
One of the Misfit endings also mentions the memorial was used for capital punishment.
The Misfits' laziness caught up with them when the Legion attacked Camp Golf. Those who weren't killed in the attack attempted to flee, but were caught at Mojave Outpost, court-martialed, and hanged from the Ranger Monument.
A few years ago, I interviewed area designer J.R. Fosvig and asked him about his process for making the area. As for Mojave Outpost, the high level was that it was the crossroads and the monument was the centerpiece, a landmark that could be seen from just about anywhere. We had joked about having the back fence lead to the California/San Francisco DLC. The road had a lot more cars originally, looking something akin to an apocalypse movie where everyone gets stuck on the road. But performance, especially if you set them all off to explode, required a massive reduction in the number of cars. Ghost and Knight were a couple of my fave characters. I imagine Ghost as this solo ranger on watch, and probably a pretty badass sniper just waiting for anyone to creep into her territory. If/when it went down, she could bunker up on the sandbags and send lead downrange.
Used to be a ranger, one of the first they sent out east back before we took the dam. Observation and reconnaissance. We took the lay of the land, checked out the locals, and kept ourselves inconspicuous. A couple friends of mine were the first to scout the dam. That was back in '73, if I recall. A lot of those rangers are dead now. Vegas always chewed men up. It's just a little more literal nowadays.
Sterling was one of the first rangers to scout the Mojave for the NCR in 2273, while his friends, likely also rangers, were the first to scout Hoover Dam. The next year in 2274, President Kimball sent a large contingent of NCR forces to occupy Hoover Dam. However, it's worth noting there's some conflicting dates regarding this, like the guide mentioning it happened way back in 2251, though that date seems to be a remnant of early development.
I was down there for most of it, so I can't tell you much of what the boys with the guns were doing up top. From talking to the boys that were fighting up there, I can tell you that Hanlon managed to pull off what most people would have thought impossible.
In 2277, the Rangers played a major role in the First Battle of Hoover Dam. Caesar's forces attacked, and in response, Chief Hanlon had his forces fall back to Boulder City, a minor settlement near the dam which had been rigged to explode. The Rangers drew some of the Legion veterans into the city and detonated the explosives, defeating the legate Joshua Graham and his army. A note in a bombed-out building by a skeleton depicts the bravery of a ranger named Teresa Lutz. She and several other soldiers were cut off from their platoon. Unable to escape, they valiantly chose to fight until the end. Hanlon mentions the Rangers received credit for the victory, something that irritated General Oliver, the commanding officer of the NCR Army.
Oliver can't stand that Rangers got credit for victory at Hoover. Whatever I recommend, he does the opposite.
Ranger military outpost. We're keeping an eye on the Legion activities south of here at Cottonwood Cove.
At some point prior to the events of New Vegas, makeshift ranger stations were set up across the Mojave, each serving a different tactical purpose. Ranger Station Alpha was initially a frontline outpost, but was altered to a support role after Hoover Dam was taken, keeping track of Legion movement along the narrows of the Colorado River. Ranger Station Bravo watches out for Legion troops attempting to flank the NCR's position at Hoover Dam. Charlie protects the highway running through Nipton. Echo watches troop movement around Cottonwood Cove, and Foxtrot keeps a lookout for the Great Khans. From these operating bases, Rangers scout the nearby region and radio any intel to the Ranger stations, which is then relayed to Camp Gulf, the headquarters of the Rangers. The Rangers there analyze the information and react accordingly, sending either information to the camps or troopers into the field.
For about 10 years now. Toughest training I've ever done, and was the proudest day of my life when I got my Ranger badge.
Freeing slaves was enough to join the Rangers initially, but the recruitment process became more difficult over time. The specifics of their training is mostly a mystery, but some Rangers do elaborate on it. Stepanak mentions well-performing NCR troopers are selected for the training.
The Rangers mostly draw from the basic NCR Army. A trooper who shows exceptional skill at fighting and scouting can be nominated for the training.
He also reveals only a small percentage of those troopers are even capable of completing the training.
We're part scout, part commando, part sheriff. The training is brutal, and I'd say 8 out of 10 recruits washes out before the end. Before you get your Ranger badge, you've got to prove you can be quieter than a shadow, and more ferocious than a deathclaw.
Something illustrated by the fact that there are apparently well under 100 Rangers in the entire region.
Couple dozen, I'd say, most of them posted at stations like this one. We either man the station or patrol the immediate area.
He states their role expanded from fighting slavers to being a scout, sheriff, and commando. But Ranger Dobson reveals the faction has still had many engagements against slavers.
All this is a slave collar. Seen plenty of these infernal contraptions in my day, and I know just how to spring them. Hold still.
The use of quotes in the next line suggests the Rangers' motto is to protect against all forms of tyranny.
To protect against all forms of tyranny. As simple as that. 30, 40 years ago, the wasteland was full of despots. Slavers, raiders, tough-talking hoodlums with gangs who'd like to kick around towns. Back then, the NCR military was still young. Couldn't cover much ground. It took groups like ours to tip the balance back to the good guys.
He also mentions the group is made up exclusively of volunteers.
Rangers are volunteers. Every man and woman who signs up is willing to die for the NCR, myself included.
And he reveals they're taught to notice when someone is lying.
In Ranger School, they teach you how to spot a liar. I don't know why you're lying, but have it your way. We'll protect this town or die trying.
Not only can they spot a liar, they can also see through faction disguises, as some Rangers are set to use the sniffer script. Hanlon comments on their use of misdirection as well.
Sorting and manipulating intelligence is what I do. It's what Rangers are supposed to do. This job isn't all gunfighting and gulping shots of whiskey, no matter what the boys and ladies out there say.
Sheffer states they provide security on the NCR's borders.
Well, when there's trouble regular NCR troops can't handle, they send in a ranger. Problem solved. We're also responsible for keeping the borders of the NCR secure, scouting out threats, that sort of thing.
Bryce Sanders mentions they're taught some degree of first aid.
The slug went straight through. I'm a goddamned NCR Ranger, all right? I'm trained in first aid.
Mags implies that Rangers are trained as a unit who all pass or fail Ranger school together.
Gee, I don't know. Maybe because I'm saddled with the worst damn unit in the NCR Army. Think that might have something to do with it?
They also seem to be taught some degree of ethics, as Contreras can mention this.
You bribed a ranger? Ha, that's gotta be some kind of special talent.
Perhaps more than any other skill, they're taught to persevere through any hardship. Something referenced by the cut drill instructor at Camp McCarran.
Good thing you're not a ranger. When a ranger quits, he's dead.
Sue also comments on how rarely they fail their missions or die.
Hell of a thing, losing a ranger. You come to depend on them, and they come through for you so often, you forget it can happen.
Perhaps as a result of this training, some members of the faction have the Ranger Toughness perk, which increases their damage resistance by 30%. However, this perk typically only appears on randomly spawned generic Rangers. They're taught to use a variety of weapons and prefer to fight from a distance, but they are trained in hand-to-hand combat. Otho mentions that Ranger Stella killed every Legion soldier she faced at the fort unarmed.
I have a dangerous one for you. An NCR Ranger by the name of Stella. We got lucky since we rarely capture Rangers alive. Even though she's a woman, she's killed every man who's faced her in the arena, even one of the elite Kenturians, with her bare hands. Watch out for her. She's one of the deadliest fighters I've ever seen.
His reaction after you kill her is even more telling.
Unbelievable. You stood against a Ranger in single combat and survived.
You'll get the hang of that takedown. I had trouble learning it at first, too.
Ranger Andy will also teach the courier the Ranger Takedown, a backpedaling palm strike that can temporarily knock down opponents, presumably a technique learned in Ranger School.
With House dead, we'll have Vegas annexed before the year's out.
While Rangers were shown to recruit non-humans in the second game, there are only a small number of generic ghouls in their ranks in New Vegas, though ghouls do randomly spawn as veteran Rangers. There is an unused super mutant ranger named Chauncey though, and Josh Sawyer expanded on the character's purpose. He was a super mutant ranger posted at Foxtrot, primarily because of its proximity to Jacobstown, much like the Ghoul Rangers are posted at Echo due to its proximity to Searchlight. He was supposed to wear a standard flat rim ranger hat of normal size, i.e. comically small on him. Those who survive the training become a civilian ranger or a patrol ranger, though the qualifications of these roles aren't explained. Civilians are typically found at ranger stations and wear one of 3 outfits, each of which are similar in look and function. None of them provide armor bonuses, and strangely they don't act as faction armor. Despite that, civilians are more talented than regular NCR troopers, possessing a higher unarmed guns and sneak skill. However, the lack of any meaningful armor causes them to ironically always lose fights against NCR troopers. Patrol Rangers are typically found at Hoover Dam or Camp Golf, though there's also one Patrol Ranger found near each of the ranger stations. While not as powerful as their veteran counterparts, they are more skilled than NCR troopers or civilian rangers, capable of killing either easily. They also make for very deadly foes, as Bryce Anders killed a large number of fiends before being wounded.
What's it look like? I caught one in the leg. I killed a dozen of those degenerates sneaking my way in, but one got a drop on me.
Despite being more experienced, Milo states they can't command regular NCR troopers.
I'm a ranger. They're troopers. Different branches. I don't have authority over them, even though they're as green as a super mutant's backside.
A loading screen reveals that NCR Ranger patrol armor is manufactured in NCR. Their armor has a strip of cloth draped from the shoulders of the armor, and Josh Sawyer revealed the Rangers soak it in water and place it on their necks. NCR NPCs will mention the extreme cost of manufacturing this armor too.
I could buy back my life with the money it must cost to make one of those Ranger Elite armors.
Hanlon implies that Rangers are very likely to be injured and forced into retirement.
She used to be a Ranger until an injury took her out of action. Happens to a lot of us, unfortunately.
Something we see in Sterling, Moore, and Andy, all of which were so badly wounded they were discharged. For those who do make it to retirement, the NCR has set up some kind of pension for former Rangers.
Here, take this, courtesy of the Ranger Veterans Fund.
Their experience also makes them prime candidates to be promoted into higher positions in the nation's military. Colonel Moore gained reverence as a Ranger before she was injured in combat and promoted.
And if you see a squad of veterans, guys who are in their black armor, well, you won't find a more beautiful sight.
Veteran Rangers are elite NCR soldiers that are unrivaled in their combat ability, possessing a maxed out skill in guns, unarmed, and sneak. Generic NCR troopers are inspired by their fighting prowess, while the fiends and Freeside locals are terrified of them.
A platoon of veteran Rangers is like a tactical nuke, only tougher to scare.
One of the Ranger vets looked at me and I just about surrendered.
You see a Ranger in black, run the other way. Take you out from a quarter mile off. My buddy saw some sort of elite Ranger squad the other day. They took out his group from a quarter mile off.
You meet any of those Rangers dressed up in black yet? My friends say they're mutant cyborgs and they're gonna kill us all.
They're so well trained they even protect President Kimball during his trip to Hoover Dam. Some generic Rangers have lines mentioning you have to earn the veteran armor, but these requirements are never elaborated on.
If I lived to earn the black armor, I could die a happy woman.
They don't appear initially as they were deployed in Baja chasing Ghost, but it's never mentioned what they were doing there.
NCR's Senate has got funds tied up at the Boneyard. And President Kimball ordered our most experienced Rangers to chase ghosts down at Baja.
Generic NCR troopers mention it too, but don't provide any other information.
The Ranger vets are on their way from Baja. Never seen one before, but I've heard they chew nails and spit napalm. This whole war's gonna change when the Ranger veterans get here. Soon as we see the black armor, we can all breathe easier.
The Ranger veterans have been running ops in Baja. We'll be a different army with them here.
Word is our Ranger vets are finally coming up from Baja. The Legion should be pissing their togas.
Mojave Outpost sent word through the stations. The Rangers coming up from Baja moved through Dayglow a week ago.
After completing the Securitron vault in the fort, they appear in the Mojave, spawning into various NCR strongholds like Camp Forlorn Hope and Camp Golf. They were supposed to appear at Mojave Outpost too, but a scripting issue stops them from being enabled there. While regular troopers are said to be under-equipped, veterans are given a variety of powerful weapons like brush guns, sniper rifles, and hunting shotguns. Some veterans even receive a specialized weapon in the Ranger Sequoia, a revolver based on the real Magnum Research BFR. Its engraving reads, "For honorable service and against all tyrants." The bottom of the grip has a plate suggesting they aren't given out until a Ranger has been in the service for 20 years, likely making their carriers some of the most experienced warriors in the Wasteland. It is worth noting they're pretty evenly matched against NCR heavy troopers though. Unlike patrol armor, the distinctive black veteran armor is essentially pre-war riot/combat gear the unit adopted.
The Baja Rangers can do more advanced night scouting and sharpshooting to assist the troopers. Ranger combat helmets are old pre-war gear. They have built-in low-light optics. makes a big difference.
Their visual design went through several iterations, as Josh Sawyer worried the black trench coat and gas mask look was overused. Wes Burt developed the design. I shared your concerns, so there were a few things I requested to keep it from turning into Jinra Part 53. First, I asked that he should wear jeans and boots. I also requested that he should typically have a revolver or lever-action rifle with a bandolier for bullets. Last, I asked for his jacket to be dark brown, not completely black. I wanted to pull some of the color elements towards warmer cowboy tones instead of strict neutrals. Wes is a really fantastic artist, and I think he did a great job. Their armor turned out so well it was featured on the box art, joining BOS as the only 2 games to break the series' box art curse. Tycho's description of Desert Ranger armor would also inspire the Desert Ranger combat armor in Honest Hearts. The armor's original owner, R.B. Vickers, was a member of the US military who fought against Chinese forces in Shanghai and Nanjing. However, Josh Sawyer has stated that Vickers was not a Desert Ranger, and suggested that at some point after his demise it was utilized by an unknown Desert Ranger. Notably, the armor set's helmet was set up incorrectly and strangely has no weight. Players who have a high reputation receive an emergency radio for NCR support. This is a dope idea in theory, but it's a very glitchy, very broken item. If you kill the NPC who gives you the radio before he can talk to you, he'll immediately respawn and continue trying to talk to you. If you kill him up close, he'll respawn inside of his own blood, give you the radio, and then run away like nothing happened.
You've done a good turn for the NCR, and now we'd like to do one for you. Here's an NCR emergency 2-way radio. You call, and we'll come running. You're not alone out here. The NCR has your back. Stay safe and good hunting.
Sometimes they'll spawn as you enter an area and instantly greet you.
You've done a good turn for the NCR, and now we'd like to do one for you.
If you call for a supply drop right after he speaks to you, he'll often be disabled and then strangely respawn before repeating the conversation all over again. If you catch up to him after he talks to you, he'll repeat the same set of lines over and over. After talking to you, he runs back to Camp McCarran, where a trigger box in front of the entrance disables him. When selecting a radio option, a radio operator was planned to reply to you. There was a large amount of dialogue written, but most of it wasn't recorded and the idea was ultimately cut.
Stay safe out there. There is no NCR support in your area. Suggest a tactical retreat. NCR Ranger support en route to your location. Support request received. Deploying troopers to your area. Hold tight. Help is on the way. Coordinates for supply cache in your region being sent now. Sorry, sir, that's all the support I can spare today. Received. Find some cover. NCR support is on the way.
There's code for it, but a nearby dev note mentions, when the player makes a selection on the emergency radio, the radio op will reply acknowledging the selection. Note, currently this doesn't work. Something to do with the talking activator. But these lines are left here, commented out, in case I have a flash of inspiration. That flash of inspiration unfortunately never came. Calling for a ranger always summons a patrol ranger, but it was originally going to depend on your NCR reputation. If you were liked, you'd always call in a weaker civilian ranger. If you were idolized before the veterans arrived, you'd receive a patrol ranger. If you were idolized and they had returned from Baja, you'd summon a veteran ranger. This is all set up, but the code doesn't work properly.
Ranger at the ready. Ranger at the ready. Ranger at the ready.
The rangers you summon also have varied dialogue, but an error causes them to replay the same line over and over.
NCR Ranger reporting for duty. Here we are. You just point and we'll shoot. Here I am. Just point at what needs killing.
One riot, one ranger. Let's get this done. Heard you were in a spot of trouble, friend. Let's fix that. For the Republic!
You called for an extra gun? You're lucky I happen to be nearby.
I got your flank! You just shoot what's in front of you!
Ranger here. Where's the fight?
In the original release, troopers or rangers called using the radio could follow you into most interior locations. One of the patches altered this, and when you enter an interior, they're automatically dismissed, making the radio much less useful than originally intended. Dismissed rangers also return to Camp McCarran where they're disabled, but if you catch up to them before they reach it, they will sometimes randomly rejoin your party. If you travel to the entrance of Camp McCarran while a ranger is in your party, they'll walk into that trigger box and get immediately disabled. Both the radio operator and summoned rangers aren't a part of the Don't Tase Me Bro faction, so Securitrons will kill them if they try to follow you into the strip. Like most aspects of New Vegas, the Rangers also have some notable bugs and mistakes. Ranger Andy owns several items in Cliff's house, like all of the items inside this chest. Their houses are right next to each other, so it was an easy mistake to make. Much stranger, however, is that Andy owns some of the surgical tubing inside several houses in Nelson. I'm not sure what happened here, but my headcanon is that someone is stealing all of Andy's shit and hiding it across the wasteland. Comm Officer Tilden doesn't have a sandbox package, so he just stands in the same spot forever. Some of the dead veterans in the Long 15 are incorrectly named NCR Trooper. They also carry trooper weapons that Rangers never carry in the base game. There's an NPC class called NCR Ranger, but ironically several important Rangers like Chief Hanlon and Ranger Grant don't use it. Instead, both use the NCR Trooper class, which has lower perception, endurance, and agility than the Ranger class, but higher charisma. Telling Hanlon a secret to save causes him to slightly teleport afterwards. I'm guessing he's just really happy you let him go. Afterwards, he can get stuck on the door until he magically teleports through it. Normally he's behind a locked door, but when he dies, he's killed by Code and the gun is spawned beside him. This isn't the same weapon he has in his inventory, so you can actually get 2 of them over the course of his quest. After that, a ranger runs into the room and checks on him. Regardless of how much time passes, the ranger will stay there eternally though. Hanlon also caused crashes during development that discouraged port-specific patches, as Josh Sawyer recounted. 1. If we had generated ESMs per platform, that would have been a crazy nightmare for a lot of reasons. A slightly less risky approach could have been to script the removal of assets, using the isPC/isXbox/isPS3 functions. But that also introduces its own host of potential problems, especially if objects are attempting to reference something as the script removes it. We ran into a small but non-trivial number of crashes in FNV, involving persistent references attempting to interact with an object as the player transitions out of his or her current area. E.g., Chief Hanlon attempts to sit in a chair. The player leaves the area, the chair Hanlon wants to sit on is unloaded, and the game crashes.
Hanlon is pretty legendary. People talk about what he did at the first Battle of Hoover Dam with awe and respect.
Hanlon was voiced by Chris Christopherson, who actually completed Ranger School in the Army before starting his music career. His script was written by Josh Sawyer, and when talking about his writing process, he mentioned, "As with writing, role-playing about topics with which you are familiar is generally a good approach. There are parts of my cynicism and despair in Chief Hanlon, parts of my idealism in Arcade, and parts of my struggle to be honest with myself in Joshua Graham." Hanlon's lore dates back to him joining the Rangers some 40 years before the events of New Vegas, even before Elise became chief of the faction. 20-odd years later, he led a group of Rangers to Baja to check reports of a raider attack. In a telling line, he believes this event was his one good action over the course of 40 years of service.
It's kind of a long one, but all right. About 25 years ago, a group of NCR settlers pushed way south into Baja. I guess it doesn't seem so far now if you look at a map, but back then they were out of ways. They built this little shanty town around a well in the middle of nowhere. Called it Rattletail. Word got back to one of our stations that raiders had been attacking the place. I went out with 6 Rangers. We must have been on the trail for a week before we got to Rattletail. We lost one woman to night stalkers and another almost died of dehydration. When we reached the place, it's 6 shacks set up around an old well. There's over 24 bodies lying in the dunes way outside of town and 5 men with .308 rifles crouched behind sandbags. And these bodies, these people out in the sand, they aren't raiders, aren't even heavily armed. They're just people who were trying to get to the only well in 50 miles. I didn't have to talk to the men to see that they did not care one bit. They had planted an NCR flag over the well. and they would not budge until every last one of them was laid out dead and cold. So I walked up and told them there was a group of raiders coming, 100 strong. I made up some cockamamie name for them and everything. The men looked at each other, looked at us, and asked me what we were going to do about it. I told them we would take them back into NCR territory because we'd already lost 10 Rangers on the way out. 10 Rangers, 5 men with 308 rifles. Well, that was enough for them. They packed up what they could, and we took them back north. Last I heard, they settled somewhere in Anza Borrego. Raised bighorners. Had some tough times, but it worked out okay for them. So there you go. That's my one bit of good.
He mentions these earlier exploits have become tall tales among newer members.
If you want some tall tales about hunting down slavers or busting up gangs, talk to one of the younger Rangers.
It's a mystery when he ascended to the tops of the Rangers' ranks, but it was presumably sometime after the death/retirement of Chief Elise. He began to believe that continuing to occupy Hoover Dam would doom the Republic. A combination of factors would lead to his disillusionment, including a lack of funding due to an upcoming Senate election, veteran Rangers being deployed to Baja instead of the Mojave, the strain of defending the vast expanse of Nevada, and the potential cost of defeating the Legion. Considering the general corruption and incompetence you see in the faction while playing, he makes a damn good point. For example, after his death, NCR soldiers will mention this about the rest of the military's leadership.
I understand the esteemed Chief Hanlon is no longer with us. A shame. He seemed to be the only competent leadership this army had.
Eventually, he started to falsify Ranger reports, doctoring them to mention trained deathclaws, high casualties, and super mutant legionaries, ultimately hoping to destroy the popularity of the Senate and Oliver, and in turn convinced the NCR's leadership they had no chance of success in the Mojave. During the quest Return to Sender, the player can either expose his betrayal or convince him to stop. Depending on the player's actions, there are 11 separate endings for the Rangers, all of which illustrate just how important Hanlon is to the group.
After the death of Chief Hanlon, the power of NCR's Rangers was broken for years. Their organization, so reliant on the wisdom and guidance of its elder members, became a shadow of what it once was to people across the wasteland. Defying Chief Hanlon's worst fears, NCR's Rangers persevered and distinguished themselves during the Second Battle of Hoover Dam. The Rangers, along with NCR's many troopers, shared the glory of victory. Hanlon wisely stayed out of the spotlight, crediting General Oliver's leadership for NCR's success. After a brief fanfare, Hanlon stepped down as chief and returned to the peace and quiet of his ranch outside of Redding. During the attack on Hoover Dam, Chief Hanlon and his Rangers threw themselves into the path of the Legion assault, dying to the last man and woman. In the aftermath that followed in the NCR, bitter citizens and opportunistic senators were quick to denounce President Kimball and General Oliver. Hanlon and his fallen Rangers were revered for their bravery and sacrifice. Despite distinguishing themselves during the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, the Rangers' victory was short-lived due to the courier's interference. Chief Hanlon personally directed the evacuation of the Rangers to Mojave Outpost as they fell back into NCR territory. Bitter over the waste of life in the Mojave, Hanlon stepped down from his post. After a campaign in which he denounced Oliver's and Kimball's hawkish, imperialist ways, Hanlon was elected as the Senator of Redding. Although they performed admirably during NCR's defense of Hoover Dam, the Rangers fell into decline soon after. With Hanlon's plot against the occupation exposed, and Oliver hailed as the NCR's new war hero, many Rangers were greeted coldly on their return home. Few openly blamed the Rangers for Hanlon's treachery, but public and political support for the organization quickly dwindled. With Caesar's victory came a small measure of vindication for the Rangers' late Chief Hanlon. Upon the military's return, debate raged within NCR's Senate about who was to blame for the loss of Hoover Dam. Though some in NCR regarded Hanlon as a traitor, many believed he was the only military commander who saw the futility in defending New Vegas. Although they performed admirably during NCR's defense of Hoover Dam, the Rangers fell into decline soon after. With Hanlon's plot against the occupation exposed and Oliver denounced for losing Hoover Dam, many Rangers were greeted coldly on their return home. Few openly blamed the Rangers for Hanlon's treachery, but public and political support for the organization quickly dwindled. Due to the courier's intervention, Chief Hanlon abandoned his plan to sabotage the defense of Hoover Dam. The Rangers assisted the troopers admirably during the Legion's ill-fated attack. Though General Oliver and Chief Hanlon were both praised for their leadership, the chief quietly stepped out of the spotlight. After a brief fanfare for a life full of accomplishments, Chief Hanlon retired and returned to the peace and quiet of his ranch in Redding. Due to the courier's intervention, Chief Hanlon abandoned his plan to sabotage the defense of Hoover Dam. The Rangers heroically assisted NCR's troopers in their ill-fated defense against the overwhelming power of Caesar's Legion. Though many NCR military officers fled the territory soon after the dam was lost, Chief Hanlon remained at Camp Gulf to surrender to the Legion. Out of respect for Hanlon's composure and worth as an adversary, Caesar had him beheaded. Despite the late Caesar's respect for Chief Hanlon as an adversary, Legate Lanius had Hanlon crucified, along with all the other Rangers. The Rangers assisted the troopers admirably during the Legion's ill-fated attack. Though the courier snatched victory from NCR, only General Oliver was blamed for the loss of Hoover Dam. Hanlon, exhausted from a lifetime of service to the NCR, stepped down from its position in the Rangers and retired to his ranch in Redding.
Veteran armor appeared as an armor set in '76, but since the Rangers wouldn't exist for at least 60 years after it takes place, it should have been named pre-war riot armor. But that's a small nitpick. The New California expansion to the official board game would later go on to feature a Tycho card, where he's referred to as a Desert Ranger and wears Veteran Ranger armor. Since he wears generic armor in his only other appearance, I think this was an awesome homage.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, it didn't work out.
The TV show established the settlement of NCR, formerly known as Shady Sands, began to decline in 2273, 8 years before New Vegas occurred. A billboard states it was the first capital of NCR, suggesting the capital was moved and NCR was renamed Shady Sands. In a confusing decision, Shady Sands was seemingly moved into LA, despite it being pretty far away originally. It then reveals that sometime after that, it was destroyed by a member of Vault-Tec. Todd Howard later confirmed the bombings happened shortly after the events of New Vegas. Remnants of the NCR military were shown towards the end of the show, but the status of the Rangers is unknown. 2 lead farmers were shown wearing veteran armor, but it's hard to say if they were former Rangers or if they acquired the armor from dead Rangers. A Ranger poster was also shown in Vault 4. Todd Howard hinted we haven't seen the last of the NCR, however, so perhaps the Rangers will one day return to their former glory. The Rangers have a rich history dating back almost 40 years, intertwined in both real history and the series' Wasteland origins, stretching across a plethora of official, unofficial, and abandoned titles, easily making them one of the most fascinating groups in the series' history.